I have a message for the people of Lebanon. Israel's war is not with you. It's with Hezbollah.
אין שום הבדל בין חיזבאללה ללבנון. לבנון תושמד לאור כמו שהדברים מתקדמים.
How do we define victory? We define it as the destruction of Hamas's military and governing capability.
We came here with one clear purpose. The purpose is to settle the entire Gaza Strip. The entire Gaza Strip from north to south.
Just like any other decent country would, we defended our civilians and struck numerous rocket launchers before the terrorists could shoot them.
I'm going to stop it right there. Israel should not be treated like all the other countries. I absolutely disagree. We're not like all the other countries. They're actually higher than everybody else.
I also have a message of hope to the peoples of the region. The axis of terror that was built by Iran, the axis of terror,
Islamic Jihad terrorists.
Are you on the side of terrorists?
Israel's war on terror is not simply a discussion about terrorism and so-called counter-terrorism. It is rather a carefully constructed public discourse designed to make Israel's wars, which are aimed at land theft, seem reasonable and good, as if stealing land is something they have to do. Don't you see? They have to steal the land to stop the terror. But the more this goes on, the clearer it becomes what this is all about.
You may have seen this video of Israeli soldiers raising the Israeli flag over the Lebanese village of Maruna Ras. In September, the Jerusalem Post published and then removed this editorial piece entitled, "Is Lebanon Part of Israel's Promised Territory?" It caused quite a stir because the author spells out the religious reasons why these territories really belong to Israel, arguing biblical texts command Jewish people to conquer these territories to fulfill this historic promise.
You saw that crazy settler lady, Daniela Weiss, who I featured in the opening. There's just one interview of hers with CNN where she actually says, normal Palestinians don't want to live in this hell. But who created this hell?
Arabs will not stay in the Gaza Strip. Who will stay? Jews. If you want to call it cleansing, if you want to call it apartheid, you choose your definition.
Palestinians in Gaza who wish to remain in Gaza, are you saying they should be forced to go?
Palestinians in Gaza, the good ones, will be enabled.
If they don't want to go?
No, they won't.
If they don't?
The Arabs want to go.
If they don't want to go?
They want to go.
If they don't, what happens?
The normal people don't want to live in hell.
And we're meant to believe that these are the people who are fighting terror. These are the people who are fighting religious extremism.
With all due respect, we've got our own reality.
You can't... It's not a thing.
But stealing Palestinian land is not the only thing this theater of terror is trying to cover up. It's expansion beyond Palestine. Now they're entering Lebanon. And of course, they enter Lebanon with the same MO of Gaza, like they're fighting terror, Hezbollah instead of Hamas here. But a few videos ago, I made this video that I'm going to link up here, where in the opening montage, you see interviews with kids at a military fair ages ago, Israeli kids. And one is saying, my goal is to grow up and join the army so we can go back to Lebanon. And the interviewer, the adult, is telling him, but we left Lebanon. He's like, no, don't worry, we'll go back. So the idea that this land is theirs is something they've been teaching their kids for decades and continue to teach it till this very day.
לבנון, אמר אלון. אני רוצה לטייל שם, אמר אלון. אי אפשר, זה מסוכן. האויב נמצא שם. זה עדיין לא שלנו, אמר אבא. זה יהיה שלנו, חשב אלון. לבנון שלנו.
Did you see those clips of the Israeli soldiers on their way to invade Lebanon singing about the return of the Messiah? Sorry, but how are these people different than ISIS?
They're the same picture.
Speaking of invading Lebanon, what they do now before they bomb every building in Lebanon is announce to the civilians, you need to leave, you need to evacuate, this is to protect you.
Today, the Israeli military ordered people in more than 20 villages in southern Lebanon to evacuate north As troops target posts and villages, the terrorists...
This is about catching the terrorists. But don't you think these public announcements are going to also alert the terrorist to leave? Like, how do you think you're going to catch the terrorists with making these public announcements? Unless the goal is for Lebanese to evacuate. Unless the goal is actual displacement. Unless the goal is actually for you to take over. Another tactic of this theater of terror, they say they need to bomb the hospitals, which actually sustain life, which is what they want to eradicate, life that is standing in the way of their land theft. But they say they're getting into those hospitals and bombing those hospitals. I can't believe that's actually a thing that is up for debate. But they say bombing the hospitals is about hitting the bunkers of the terrorists. And in Lebanon, which they also used in Gaza, but now in Lebanon they're saying these bunkers are where Hezbollah is keeping their gold. But of course with Lebanon, unlike Gaza, which they control, they couldn't ban the reporters from going in. So media is going in and they're investigating and looking in the hospitals like the BBC, and they found nothing.
Well, we're on level -2 in the Al Sahel hospital. The area just behind me is where medical waste is stored. Even that was opened up for us to have a look, to show us there was nothing inside.
But it's always with these very primitive ways they describe us. Like like we deal with gold instead of money. Like we're just these Neanderthals. Like we're still in the system of bartering. Like, here, I'll give you gold, you give me some potato. Like, what? But the aim of all this is, of course, is to depoliticize Hamas and Hezbollah and paint them as violent terrorists driven by nothing but hatred of Jews. Not political actors who are, albeit, of course, militant, but with clear goals to stop the land theft and the occupation. Because the idea is that we live under tunnel. We're these like rats. Speaking of this degrading portrayal of us, portrayal of rats, of animals, of beasts, check out this video how they talk about Yahya Sinwar that they killed in Gaza.
Yahya Sinwar. إحنا جاي. استنى. إحنا على الطريق.
It's so incredible the psychology of Israeli soldiers when they talk about us. Because it's not just that we're terrorists that they need to kill, right? No, there's it's not even bloodlust. They need to describe us as animals, and there's always this kind of like psychosexual component, very degrading, all about humiliation. Like, this is more than just, okay, these are terrorists, we need to get rid of them and be free. No, they take pleasure in the way they describe us as animals. Like, it's really sick. And by the way, this rat they're talking about, Yahya Sinwar, this beast, he wrote a novel while in jail. He was jailed by Israel for 22 years. He wrote a novel with themes about loss and perseverance. And the protagonist of that novel was orphaned by Israel, which mirrors his own life, because a lot of these Hamas fighters have been orphaned by Israel. They've lost everything. And another claim that was debunked about Yahya Sinwar, and which can actually apply to all Hamas, they say that the Hamas leaders are swimming in their millions in Qatar, like they don't care. When they killed Yahya Sinwar on the battlefield, alone, he was just wearing his keffiyeh, and still after they shot him, he threw whatever he had, a stick at the drone. This is resilience. He was among his people. He wasn't hiding behind hostages. He wasn't using Palestinians as human shields. He was fighting. They were even surprised, the soldiers that found him, like, because he was like wrapped in keffiyeh, when they found out it's Yahya Sinwar, that he was just on the battlefield. And actually there was a debate on Israeli television whether the Israeli soldiers should have released that footage, because now it shows Yahya Sinwar as a hero.
טוב עשינו שפרסמנו את התמונות של סינואר כך ברגעיו האחרונים מהרחפן.
תראה, אני חושב שהתמונה הזאת בישראל רואים אותה X, ובעולם הערבי בכלל ובעזה בפרט רואים אותה Y. שהוא נלחם עד טיפת דמו האחרונה, גם עם יד חצי יד או יד שבורה.
Because that's all they care about, the optics and how things look. It's not about the reality. Like you're debating whether you should have shown reality because it paints you in a different light. Can't you even hear yourself? The reality is there. This man you're trying to portray as a terrorist was fighting among his people, and you're debating whether it should have been shown.
מביאה לאיזושהי השפלה של יחיא סינואר בקרב העזתים, או בקרב העולם הערבי, או בקרב תומכי הציר, נקרא לזה הפרו-איראני, הם טועים טעות חמורה.
What we call the axis of evil, exactly what you call, what you decide, it's all about framing. You rewrite history, you're rewriting the present, you decide that this is all terror. But they need to do this. They need to lie to themselves, to convince themselves of the lies that the government has been trapping them in. Speaking of deluded Israelis, did you see those clips of the young Israelis dancing at a club to a song about Hezbollah as the bombs were falling, as their soldiers were invading Lebanon? This song, clearly a popular song because they're all singing to it, about Yalla, Hezbollah, Inshallah, like they're making fun.
You see it, right? The cage you're in.
But the enemy of these people is not Hezbollah or Hamas or Houthis or whoever they decide to call terrorists today. The real enemy of Israel is those who resist these expansions into the lands. Their plans to keep robbing the land and our resources, that's who the terrorist is, the ones who resist. And framing resistance as terror gives this land occupation legitimacy. We have to fight terror. Who wouldn't want to fight terror? Just listen to what these two former Israeli prime ministers have to say.
So are you saying Benjamin Netanyahu deliberately boosted Hamas to try to prevent a Palestinian state?
Yeah, sure. He deliberately and systematically even told, is on record, whoever wants to avoid the threat of a two-state solution has to support my policy of paying protection money to the Hamas.
So what we did, with the permission of our Prime Minister, is to let Qatar to transfer a huge amount of money in cash, probably more than $1.4 billion. By doing it, we increase the power of Hamas.
You dirty bird. How could you?
By the way, that was me lip-syncing to Kathy Bates from Misery. That's actually one of my favorite horror movies. And throughout this video, I'm going to feature little crazy lip-syncs just to lighten the load, to balance the darkness of the subject with some funny lip-syncs. So, sue me, bitch. But to go back to what those two former Israeli prime ministers said about what Netanyahu did, how he deliberately supported terror. Because when you support the rise of an Islamic terror group whose charter rejects your existence, and by the way, the charter of Hamas has changed since then, but if you are supporting a group who rejects your existence, then you can say, oh look, all we have to deal with is terror. Terror only understands violence, so we must use violence. In the book, The Other Side of Deception, written by Mossad whistleblower Viktor Ostrovsky, he said that aiding Hamas meshed with Mossad's general plans for the region. Because their vision of an Arab world run by fundamentalists that we have to fight. To keep this narrative going of the only democracy in the world surrounded by crazy terrorist neighbors.
Hamas was not interested in a two-state solution, which is exactly what the Israelis wanted to avoid. The bad guys, from Netanyahu's point of view, were the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank, because Mahmoud Abbas, who heads up the Palestinian Authority, is in favor of a two-state solution.
At Judaism's holiest site, Benjamin Netanyahu gave a prayer of thanks for his political comeback. His surprising and crushing victory, the product of an 11th hour push for right-wing votes, promising there would be no Palestinian state on his watch.
By the way, I'm breaking down this video in 3 chapters. The first one I'm calling The Terrorist in the Mirror, which is about how Israel actually is projecting onto Palestinians. And then the second chapter is America the Teacher, because the war on terror was something that's invented by the United States. And then the third chapter, we're going to go into the tactics of how Israel cooked up this terror. For decades has been cooking it up. And yeah, America is all over this video, because who else uses fighting terror as a cover for colonialism?
Now with the war on terrorism, the Bush administration argues anything goes.
Yeah, that was Robert Dreyfuss, the author of that book, Devil's Game, which I read while researching this video. Yeah, like he said, as far as the US is concerned, anything goes when you're trying to fight terror. And supporting Islamic movements, radical Islamic movements, is perfect because it allows them to dominate the strategically vital area of the Middle East.
The idea that Islam could be a barrier or a bulwark or a force that would oppose, first of all, the Soviet Union and communism, but later we find also to oppose the nationalists that were beginning to emerge in this post-colonial time.
Big mistake. Big. Huge.
And this deliberate unleashing of Islamist fundamentalist movements onto the region is something that both Israel and the US has been doing for decades. And now fighting Islam, fighting terror, is the catch-all excuse for anything they want to do here.
How do you respond to the accusation that's made by some of the families that the Israeli government has put its war aims before the lives of the remaining hostages?
I'm afraid what the families should I think it's quite clear for them, but still I want to say that
We're dealing with a barbaric terror organization.
You notice how his question was about what about the families of the hostages who are clearly upset with Israel? She just pivots to talking about terror.
Look over there!
And she pivots for a reason, because the hostages and their families are the only people other than Palestinians who see Israel for what it is. There's no lying to these people. And this distracting theater of terror gives them carte blanche to keep going. To keep going with what they've always wanted to do way before October 7. So you can demolish heritage sites in Lebanon, which is completely unnecessary, but yes, of course, because you're fighting terror. You can bomb hospitals because you're fighting terror. You can decimate more than 70% of residential places for Palestinians because you're fighting terror. Anything goes when you're fighting terror.
Nobody is arguing about Israel's right to defend itself. But the collateral damage that Israel is building up is, some people would argue, preparing a new generation of fighters against Israel.
So we have zero interest in killing civilians. We
But
have nothing.
But you're doing it.
No, we're not doing it. What we're actually
Well, they're dying.
No, we're actually it's Hamas and Hezbollah, because they're using
Well, they're in charge.
their own people as human shields, and you know that. You know that they're a terror organization.
It must really be something making stuff up all the time.
You make stuff up. It has to be believable. It's called suspension of disbelief. It's suspension of disbelief.
I like that. Suspension of disbelief.
Hey y'all, it's In Denial. Sorry if you find these funny, clowny lip syncs stupid, but you gotta keep laughing, otherwise I might just set myself on fire. Because consuming these videos about Palestine every day, no. And I gotta keep consuming them because I feel like if Palestinians have to live through it, I have to at least bear witness to it. And if I have to keep bearing witness to it, I have to just act like a clown. Okay? Please. Thank you. And speaking of bearing witness and this becoming so monstrous, what they're doing, I can't believe that we're 14 months into this thing and people are still debating and doing the two-side thing. It's crazy. Like, I know this guy, as you would expect, liberal, of course. Loves cats, loves kids, so sweet, so lovely, so kind. Really, I know I'm being sarcastic because you know where this is going. But except for Palestine, he is extremely sweet. And I recently saw him, not recently, around October 7th, the anniversary, posting something about like, if only we can get rid of Netanyahu and Islamic Jihad, then all this will end. This person has a partner who's Israeli and who has family back in Israel. So the mental gymnastics and contorting himself into this whole thing needs to happen, because otherwise, what is he supporting? Killing of civilians and stealing land? No, it has to be about terror and jihad. But there was actually a very interesting clip from the Majority Report where Sam Seder was talking about the psychology of why that happens.
I feel like we have hit a stage of this now where it is so horrific. It is so obvious that even without
you can't even acknowledge it.
Even without context, that to remain in denial, you need to go further.
Thank you for the shout out, Sam. But seriously, if you have to keep supporting Israel, you have to believe that they're fighting terror. Otherwise, what is there left to believe in? But for me, the sickest use of this war on terror is how Israel now is claiming that the last remaining Jazeera journalists in north of Gaza are terrorists. So after banning all international media from entering, for their safety, of course. It's crazy. Like, they're bombing a country, they're like, sorry, we can't let you in to cover that because it's so unsafe. But you're making it unsafe. Jahannam, inshallah, tiblakum. Anyways, you like my hair, by the way. Thank you. So basically, they put a target on these 6 journalists, giving carte blanche to their soldiers to kill them. Because you know the Israeli soldiers, they're just like 18, 19-year-old, like rabid, like just killers. They think they're playing a video game. So if you release this image that these are 6 terrorists, what do you think is going to happen to them? Can you imagine the sadism and cruelty? And by the way, these 6 terrorists, this is what they're covering.
من ايش تبكي؟
I don't think there are any braver journalists than the ones working from Gaza right now. And it's such a stark contrast to the mainstream media, who are nothing but stenographers for Israel now at this point. And this is why it's so crucial to stay aware of how the media might be influencing you. This is why I use ground news. It gives me a clear bird's eye view of who the media is that I'm consuming and how they might be biased. For those who are naturally skeptical of the information that we're fed, ground news is essential for getting the full picture. It gathers all sources covering a story in one place and lets you assess them based on factual accuracy and ownership. Take, for example, the story about the 6 Palestinian journalists accused of being terrorists. Ground news showed that out of 90 plus media outlets reporting worldwide, only 53% have a high factuality rating, which I think is very interesting and valuable when assessing who to trust. Comparing the headlines from right-leaning media and left-leaning media is also very eye-opening. Left-leaning media, when covering this story, emphasized media freedom and that Al Jazeera rejects this fabrication. The center-leaning media presented IDF's claims as unequivocal proof, and the right-leaning media tended to discredit Al Jazeera by repeating IDF's claims about the training of those journalists as terrorists. So if you're on the same mission as I am, which is freeing your mind, decolonizing your mind, head to ground.news/indie or click on the link in the description or scan the QR code. My viewers save 50% on the Vantage plan, which I also use. And by the way, supporting Ground News is not only supporting my channel and keeping the lights on and helping me to keep going with Palestine, but it also supports an independent news platform that helps us think critically. And while we're on the subject of supporting India, I really want to thank the people who donated to the last couple of videos and all the new members to the channel. Thank you guys so much. Love you. And very quickly before we get back to talking about terror, I want to plug my upcoming show, which is in December. And by the way, I'm working on a show for next year, which is all about Palestine, but that's for 2025, 2026. But because Palestine is all I think about, now it's starting to become about every show of mine. And this upcoming one, which is about fear of intimacy and love, is also filled with Palestine references. And I love watching the audience gasp when I just suddenly bring up Palestine. They're like, take it, bitch. Now let's get back to the guest of honor on this video. The monster. The demon. The Satan. The terrorist who has the charisma, uniqueness, nerve, and talent to commit terror and accuse their victim of being the terrorist.
Because with your vicious motherfuckers, it do take nerves.
EU foreign policy chief says Israel is using starvation as a weapon of war. You're losing friends, aren't you?
So I will ask you a question in return. I mean, between Israel, yes, a democratic country, and Hamas on the other side, would you tell me that you're on the side of Hamas? Are you on the side of terrorists?
Do you know this guy called Ethan Klein, a podcaster? His wife used to serve in the IDF. And he had her, and this was years ago, way before this, like I think the video is 6 years old. And he had her on his channel, like asking her about her experience. And at some point in the interview, he literally goes like, and you went to the terrorist cities? The terrorist cities?
You told me once you went on like a mission with them to like a terrorist city.
Yeah.
That was kind of a crazy story.
The word terrorist for them is synonymous with Palestinian. Of course, if you ask them, they will say, no, the children, of course, the children. But when you keep calling every Palestinian a terrorist, when you actually call a city, this is a terrorist city, what the fuck?
Terrorist city?
Terrorism is an emotive word. In the West, the word terrorism conjures up images of individuals who carry out seemingly random acts of violence against civilians.
Israeli murderers are called commandos. Arab commandos are called terrorists.
Scholars agree that terrorism is the use of fear and violence to cause political change, which means terrorism is then a strategy that can be employed by any political actor, be it individual, group, or a state like Israel.
One of the images that really haunts me is from my first trip. There was a mass casualty, and it was one of our last evenings. And when a mass casualty happens, it's chaos. And I remember walking past a girl, and she can't have been older than 20. And her face, I just remember seeing her face, and she couldn't open her eyes. Her every limb was broken. She had blood coming out of her abdomen. She was just crying, and there was no one around her. And I think that image always stays with me.
There is widespread agreement among legal scholars that Israel's actions are war crimes. There's also an increasing number of scholars who agree that Israel's actions constitute acts of genocide. There's also growing evidence that it intends to depopulate large parts of Gaza, which would constitute ethnic cleansing. However, missing from these discussions is the way in which Israel's actions fit the definition of terrorism.
Our war is against Hamas, not against the people of Gaza.
It is clear that he's trying to scare Palestinians, which is essentially the same strategy used by Al-Qaeda on 9/11 and the July 7 bombers in London. In each of these cases, innocent civilians were traumatized and terrorized into changing their political behavior. But Israel doesn't care about civilians. Just check out this call that one of the people giving warnings to the Lebanese civilians to evacuate their homes. Just listen to this.
أنا مدني، أنا بيت مدني، ما عندي نشاط عسكري.
أنا عارف أنت بيت مدني، اطلع من البيت اسمع مني. ده تحذير.
تحذير?
An Israeli military intelligence source told Israeli journalist Yuval Abraham that Israel knows that their actions constitute terrorism. This is why Israel is so hyper-focused on making its target be the terrorist. So then the killing becomes legitimate.
It's hard to look at this situation and not see that Israel is being the irrational actor in this.
How is it irrational? I mean, they had to respond, surely, to the Hezbollah rockets that were being fired over. They've done it in a very different way than they did in Gaza. It seems to be much more targeted. They couldn't have just sat back and done nothing, could they?
I don't think anything that you just said is true. Israel's pager attacks on Lebanon were, even according to a former CIA head, an act of terror. The invasion,
they were targeted at Hezbollah terrorists.
That was not a targeted attack.
Yes, it was. They were all of the pages.
Well, if you're going to keep interrupting me, I'm not going to be able to actually say anything. The former head of the CIA has said unquestioningly those were a terror attack. If you booby trap a load of pagers and other devices to go off randomly in public areas, then inevitably people are going to get injured, innocent people. And then you look at taking out Hassan Nasrallah.
The headquarters were under the building that was bombed.
I don't care. It doesn't justify that epic loss of life.
I love how the host was quick to point out that it was Nasrallah who was hiding under a building. But it's a building with civilians. Honey. I wonder if he would think the same if the terrorist was hiding under a building with English or American civilians, or under a hospital or a school in the West.
So if there was a school shooter right now, should we just blow up the entire school to get after the school shooter?
In my opinion,
is that your opinion?
Yes.
Yeah?
Yes. Or what? Just let them shoot. Let the terrorists exist.
Right. So if there was a school shooter, do you have kids? If there's a school shooter in your kid's house, in your school.
I'm talking about in Gaza.
Oh, just in Gaza. Right, where the cockroaches are, right?
You just don't understand that there's the question. So the question is if there's a terrorist in the U.S.
Yeah. And he's hiding in a school.
As there are many.
Where there are 300 students in there.
Yeah, hiding in a school.
Right. We should blow up this whole school. Bunker busted, 2,000 bombs.
Yeah, 2,000
pounds of bombs.
The fact that you even have to think about it.
I don't know who this guy is, but he's some US politician. But I actually like the way he was starting to see it. Because Americans, unlike Israelis, they're not that invested ideologically. They're not drunk on the indoctrination. They've just been exposed to Israel's narrative as the default. So when you question them, most of the time they're like, hold on a minute. Unlike Israelis who can't, they just are doubling down. When you're invested emotionally in something, whether you're an Israeli or someone who's partnered with Israeli, if you have some stake, if you have family or someone you care about, you will do your best to keep refusing reality.
If you gave me a button to just erase Gaza, every single living being in Gaza would no longer be living tomorrow, I would press it in a second. You press this, all the Palestinians are gone. You'd be like, fucking hey, is there another one?
Stop calling me, you
Listen to me. We traced the call. It's coming from inside the house.
I'm sure if you watch my channel, you've probably seen this one clip of a funeral held for an Israeli settler soldier who died. And the guy who was giving the eulogy was his brother, crying, talking about revenge. And this guy was actually crying over his brothers, like saying it like just publicly, as he knew he was being filmed, that, he's mourning the brother. Oh my God, you wanted to go and kill every child and woman and take our land back.
הריבונות של ישראל מתחילה בים ונגמרת בנהר. בשלב הזה, או שבעצם אנחנו גם נמצאים את עבר הירדן, בשלב הבא?
בסדר, לאט לאט. כתוב בחז"ל שעתידה ישראל, עתידה ירושלים, להתרחב עד דמשק.
Yes, we here in the Holy Land, Israel.
Can't you see it's what God wants?
But of course, in terms of international PR, Israel is very smart to hide all these religious fanatics from public eye. Netanyahu just gets up there with his American accent, talks about this is a war of civilizations.
Because this is a war of civilization against barbarism.
And of course, no discussion about the fake war on terror is complete without discussion of the United States. On September 20th, 2001, George W. Bush gave a speech in which he used the word war on terror for the first time. This was the first time that phrase was said publicly. It was a speech to Congress with a carefully constructed storyline which was clearly written for him. He's not the sharpest pencil in the box. But a very well-crafted speech that would justify all the wars to come.
Our war on terror begins with Al-Qaeda. It will not end until every terrorist group of global reach has been found, stopped, and defeated.
By the way, what this war on terror defeated is more than 200,000 innocent Iraqi civilians since 2003. That's who was defeated.
I know this may be difficult for you, but it's for the best.
Americans are asking, why do they hate us? They hate our freedoms.
In other words, the US is a blameless victim shoved into this war without warning. And a day after 9/11, then Prime Minister of Israel, Ariel Sharon, gave this address to his people.
The fight against terror is an international struggle of the free world against the forces of darkness.
The reason I bring up 9/11 is because it served as a perfect lesson for Israelis about how to communicate suffering and how to communicate this threat of Islam as this thing that you have to fight in all your future endeavors.
3,000 Hamas terrorists stormed into Israel. They butchered 1,200 people from 41 countries, proportionately compared to our population size. That's like 20 9/11s in one day.
You know, if you think back to the main comparison that I reached for on October 7th, the obvious comparison, of course, was to 9/11. You know, liberal democracy is attacked by a group of jihadi terrorists. The difference, of course, was in the aftermath. On September 12th, 2001, it would have been impossible to imagine young people across the West, including here in America, waving the flags of Hamas and Hezbollah and shouting glory to the martyrs.
You either have to be really stupid, really indoctrinated, or really cynical to pretend that millions of people around the world are just moved by wanting to glorify jihad. Really? Sick how they lie. It's sick. It was very interesting also from her comment about how, like, yes, it was like 9/11, but it was worse because we had rape.
And slaughter, and in the case of Israel, also rape.
The suffering of Israelis is always bigger. Everything about Israelis is better. But even American politicians repeat this narrative that Israel's suffering is greater.
Well, for a nation the size of Israel, it was like 15 9/11s. But I'm sure those horrors have tapped into some kind of primal feeling in Israel, just like it did and felt in the United States.
That primal fearing this demented clown is talking about is supposed to suggest that both countries, Israel and America, were taken by surprise, like they didn't know this was coming, despite well-documented evidence of impending threats that both parties were privy to. That evidence included a president's daily brief Bush received on August 6, 2001, entitled "Bin Laden Determined to Strike in the US." Similarly, Israeli officials, I'm not talking about Israeli citizens, Israeli officials knew about drills that were taking place right on the border of kidnapping, preparing, and paragliders. They were training for October 7. And there was actually a troop of Israeli soldiers, female Israeli soldiers, whose job is just to watch, be observing. And they were reporting for months like, hey, Hamas is training, something's happening. And they were getting ignored. The families of these women who were killed, because also their base was undefended. And this was reported on CNN, quoting an article from the Wall Street Journal, which is not exactly a pro-Palestinian paper, written by an American-Israeli journalist. Check this out.
Now, a year since October 7th, 101 hostages are yet to be brought home from Gaza. This includes 5 female Israeli soldiers, and Hamas killed 15 in their unit. Months before the attack, they had reported suspicious activity by the militant group. In a recent report for the Wall Street Journal, correspondent Anat Peled investigates that failure.
One young woman told me that she saw a training exercise, including a mock tank and a fake kidnapping going on inside Gaza. Another girl said that she basically saw people dressed in all black and their face covered, which they were taught to identify as Hamas elite unit, and they were pointing at different observation points.
Why did no one listen to them?
Yeah, so these young women have become a symbol for Israel's intelligence failure of October 7th, which is the worst in its history.
That's suspicious. That's weird.
Now you could say that Israel ignoring these warnings is part of a conspiracy theory, so I'm just going to let that go. But this ignoring of reality fits very much the reality of the everyday Israelis, because they ignore, for them, the clock did start on October 7 because they can ignore the 17-year-old chokehold they had on Gaza. Basically, if Palestinians hate us for who we are, rather than what we do, nothing can be gained from examining. What's the point of examining anything of our policies? No, they just hate us because we're free and we're Jewish. So then you never have to look at yourself and see what you're doing. It can't be because you like dancing at a music festival. That can't be the reason that you believe Palestinians are angry, because you like to dance in a music festival. Surely you're more intelligent than that. But again, this is very similar to the US when they claim that 9/11 people just hate us for our freedom, not for what you've been doing in the region. Again, 9/11 was horrible. Bin Laden sucks. But you can't tell yourself that all this is happening because people hate you because you're free and you're blonde or whatever the fuck you think is the reason. You're killing, you're occupying for decades. But to go back to this theme of America being the teacher, being the example in this, actually what Gaza has revealed in the last more than 14 months now, they play this bad cop, good cop because they're one and the same. This is an American war. There was a report that was released that between last October and the end of this September 2024, 70% of the weapons that killed Palestinians are American. America is not just an ally. No. They're one and the same. And there have been many a Freudian slip throughout the years that shows exactly that.
We strongly believe that given its size, its history, the region that it's in, and the threats that are leveled against us, the threats that are leveled against us, against it.
And he's right. It's against us. Us is the US and Israel. They're one because their interest in the region is the same. There was a very interesting interview I listened to by a Lebanese-French journalist who wrote a book on Hezbollah, the only book worth reading about Hezbollah. She grew up in the south of Lebanon, where Hezbollah was formed in the 80s. That's when she was growing up. And she spoke in this interview and in her book about the many Israeli invasions into Lebanon throughout the years. The first one was in 1978, and the big one that everybody knows about in 1982. And their goals from those invasions was A, to bring to presidency a Christian alt-right president for Lebanon, and to kick out the Palestinians. But of course, there's also annexing the land.
Because at the time, the Israelis had their eye on the water of a river that is in southern Lebanon called the Litani River. It's roughly at 30 kilometers to the north of the border. And that's a river that is very rich in water, and rich in water all year round. And, it's common knowledge that the Israelis have always had serious water issues. So they're poor in water, and obviously benefit also from the soil of South Lebanon, because it's very fertile soil. So this invasion plan, southern Lebanon, is to become Israel's new north.
And if you fast forward to today, US is also clearly showing its interest in Lebanon. They're actually building an embassy in Lebanon, a big embassy that costs $1 billion. Now, why would you need such a big embassy in Lebanon? It's the third most expensive after the embassy in Iraq and the UK. In Iraq, surely, you're trying to make up for all the money that you lost. UK is a big ally, but why in Lebanon? This small, tiny little country. Why do you need this embassy? This base, maybe? Base for gathering intelligence. I want to play you another Freudian slip by US Special Envoy to Lebanon, Amos Hochstein, talking to a Lebanese TV channel called LBC about US's plans for security in Lebanon, security without Hezbollah. And then he starts talking about the selection of the Lebanese president. Check this out.
Police should be strengthened as well to provide internal security. And at the same time, have a new government once Lebanon selects a president. Once Lebanon selects a
You dirty bird.
Speaking of US and Israeli meddling in our region, let's go to the decades-long of unleashing Islamic fundamentalism on the region and the tactics, how they've been doing it, how they've been cooking this up. One of Israel's favorite ways to extinguish resistance in the region is sowing discord by way of sectarianism. Sectarianism is the bloodline of imperialism in our region.
We did everything in order to make sure that Hamas will go on controlling Gaza, and Palestinian Authority will control the West Bank, so they will fight each other.
So yes, you do see it in Palestine, but nowhere is it more obvious than in Lebanon. Because now they're bombing the south, right? Where Hezbollah is. But there's been more than, I think, 1.2 million Lebanese who are displaced now all over Lebanon. They're being housed by many other sects and factions outside the south. Like many Christians are opening up. There's even a Sky Bar. I used to party it when I was like ages ago. They're actually housing Lebanese Shia in it. And now what Israel is doing is starting to bomb buildings that are outside the Shia areas that's giving home to Shia refugees. In other words, warning other people you can't even help them. Again, it's a strategy that tells the Lebanese people you have to think twice before helping anyone from the south, before actually becoming a united front, an actual front of resistance. Many Israeli officials now describing the bombing of these villages as bombing Shia villages, making the word Shia become synonymous with terror. I discovered a beautiful podcast called Do Not Worry Podcast by a Lebanese guy here on YouTube. You can find it, where he talks with different guests, and he's Christian Lebanese, and sometimes he was having guests who are like Shia, and I love their banter. First of all, they all sound American, so they're easy for you to relate to. Americanized, like yours truly. And they dismantle these lies just by the sheer fact that they're sitting there having conversation and mocking this.
This is a message to the people of Lebanon. Do you remember when your country was called the Pearl of the Middle East?
Oh, yes, we do.
I do. So what happened to Lebanon? Lebanon was once known for its tolerance, for its beauty. Today, it's a place of chaos, a place of war.
It's because you're bombing us, you fucking sick motherfucker. So anyways, he's trying to turn everyone against each other. Oh, if we just turn against Hezbollah and split the country in two, you mean you'll spare us?
And on one episode, they were featuring Lebanese people who are falling for this trap, like Christian Lebanese people who are saying, oh no, let's have separate countries. Let's be away from Shias.
And he ended it by giving his solution, which is splitting the country in two, basically.
Yeah, that worked out great the first time.
Let's have the Shias in one half, let's have the Christians in one half, or whoever doesn't want to live under Iranian rule. Let's just get a little sneak peek.
بدكم تسألوني شو الحل لكل هيدا الشيء وهيدا موضوع تاني. تقسيم البلد. Simple.
But we will not turn on each other, bitch. And if you go back to 1982, when Israel was invading the south of Lebanon, at the time, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, PLO, was visibly engaged in a process of reorientation leading to a far more compromising approach toward the Zionist state. An increased pressure was being applied by the US administration on Israel to make a deal with Palestinians. Look, they're becoming more moderate, less extreme. And Israel was not gonna have that. They don't want to negotiate. They want to take everything. Because, again, if you're talking to someone who isn't a blind, raging terrorist, someone who wants to negotiate, that means you have to make compromises. And they don't like to make compromises. They need you to be a terrorist so they can fight you, someone who's unreasonable. So anytime there's moderation, they want to wipe it out. So in the summer of 1982, Israel was faced with two options. Either start negotiating with Palestinians, with the PLO, who are moderate, or launch a preemptive attack to provoke Palestinians to act like terrorists. So in 1982, there was the Sabra and Shatila massacres, the most brutal massacre.
Between September 16th and 18th, 1982, a campaign of killing took place at the Sabra and Shatila refugee camps in Lebanon. With the backing of invading Israeli forces, a right-wing Lebanese Christian armed group called the Phalange attacked the Palestinian camps in Beirut. For nearly 40 hours, civilians were raped, tortured, and mutilated.
And Hezbollah was actually born right after the Sabra and Shatila massacre. Because not only Palestinian refugees were killed in that massacre, also Shia Lebanese from the south. And that's when Hezbollah rose and came into being. So it's always a reaction to what Israel is doing. And speaking of Israel committing acts of terror and then turning around and playing a victim, let me take you behind the curtain, behind this theater of terror as far as Hamas is concerned, to see what actually inspired Hamas's first act of terror.
After an American-Israeli settler killed 29 Palestinians at a mosque in Hebron, Hamas responded with what would become its signature tactic for the next decade, a suicide bomb. But these tactics were controversial, even among Palestinians and even within Hamas itself.
So this was in 1994, right? But Hamas was born in 1987.
In December 1987, on a strip of Mediterranean coast overcrowded with refugees, a group calling itself the Islamic Resistance Movement was founded.
And actually Hamas was an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, which was a radical Islamic movement as well. But let's park that for a minute because I want to come back to the Muslim Brotherhood later. Hamas's leader, first spiritual leader, Ahmed Yassin, was a quadriplegic, partly blind man.
احنا ما بنكره اليهود ونقاتل اليهود لانهم يهود. اليهود اهل دين واحنا اهل دين. اخويا هذا اللي من امي وابويا اللي دينه مسلم اذا اخذ بيتي وطردني منه انا بقاتله.
9 years before he founded Hamas, he used to lead a militant group called Islamic Association, which Israel used to back as a bulwark against the PLO. In 1981, Brigadier General Yitzhak Segev, who served as the Israeli military governor in Gaza in the early 80s, admitted to providing financial assistance to Mujamma al-Islamiyya, who were a precursor of Hamas, on the instruction of Israeli authorities.
Big mistake. Big. Huge.
I mentioned earlier that Hamas is an offshoot of the Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood, right? In 1953, President Eisenhower dines at the White House with Saeed Ramadan, a leader of the Muslim Brotherhood.
The ambassador in Egypt, Jefferson Caffrey, and his memo to, presumably to the CIA or the State Department, identifying Ramadan as somebody we could work with at a time when it was known to everyone who knew anything about the Middle East that this organization was basically a terrorist organization.
So this theater of terror, where you prop, you finance, you fuel the terrorists, then you pretend to fight them as a way to distract from your land theft, has been decades in the make. Israel loves to cry about these terrorists, but has a pattern of killing them the second they decide to negotiate or come to a deal or a ceasefire with Israel. By the way, Hassan Nasrallah from Hezbollah, right before he was killed, he was close to a ceasefire deal with Israelis. And that's when they were like, boom, gone.
Nasrallah would be alive today if the Biden administration ceasefire had gone into effect. If the Israelis had agreed to the ceasefire that Hamas had demanded and that the Iranians had demanded and the United States had supported.
He served his purpose. You think they couldn't have killed him before? They managed to kill Ismail Haniyeh in Iran, a sovereign state that they're supposed to be scared of, in a targeted surgical killing. They can kill these people when they want. Make no mistake.
I mean, this is a long-standing pattern, right? I mean, go back to Gaza. I mean, for years now, Israel has killed Hamas leaders or top Hamas leaders after they agree to ceasefires. There's that famous one where they kill the Hamas leader who had negotiated a ceasefire with them. And
Salah Arori in his office in Beirut.
Yeah, and there's one more too. I mean,
in 2002, Salah Shahada was killed. An entire apartment block was blown up during a ceasefire to break a ceasefire.
The reason I call this video Theater of Terror, because it's all about the lies. And this is what we have to do, dismantle the lies of Israel. The lies that Israel and the US use to continue to meddle in our region and steal our land and kill us. And once and for all, can we just stop repeating the biggest lie, which is that we are driven by hatred of Jews? I've never hated a Jewish person in my life, even until today. Like on my last video about Israel weaponizing pop culture, there have been a few anti-Semitic comments, which I left up there, by the way. Go check them out. See who wrote them. Not Palestinians, not Arabs. And I find those comments disgusting. I'm like, hold on a second. Like, this is not what we're fighting. We're not fighting Jewish people. Like, this is ridiculous. Hezbollah throughout the years, by the way, were insisting to make the distinction between anti-Zionist and anti-Jewish. Zionist in Arabic, it's Sahayna. And for years, Nasrallah would say, Al-Kayan al-Sahiyuni, which is the Zionist entity, not Judaism. And they don't deny the Holocaust, like some people say. No, actually, Ehud Olmert, who was then prime minister in 2006, during one of the most disgusting massacres in Lebanon, called Qana. Go check it out. The video doesn't have enough time or space to slot all the massacres in. And at the time, Ehud Olmert was the prime minister. Hezbollah did this animation where they made him seem like Hitler with this iconic hand move. Like, they actually think being Nazi is something disgusting. So the problem is not with Jews, babe. And by the way, speaking of 2006, that whole massacre, at the time, Condoleezza Rice said,
what we're seeing here, in a sense, is the birth pangs of a new Middle East.
Like, children need to be massacred and slaughtered like this because this is, hold on, we just need to birth a new Middle East. A new Middle East is one that is subjugated to them. As if they're reconstructing the Middle East because they're trying to free us from terrorists. Like, these groups that you call terrorists, they're resisting you invading. But no matter how hard they try to smear their resistance, they can never crush it. They can kill individuals, they can kill fighters, they can kill artists, they can kill poets, they can kill leaders of the resistance. But as the Palestinian author Ghassan Kanafani said, bodies may fall, but ideas endure. I want to leave you with what I found to be like a rousing monologue from Lebanese writer and freelance journalist Ruqayya Shamsuddin. She's from the south of Lebanon, and she recently returned after all these massacres. You can tell from her accent she sounds very Americanized, and she moved back to Lebanon because she wants to defend her people. And it's very interesting. I felt so seen by her words because I too am waking up to the idea of being proud of my heritage. And now that I'm waking up to it, a speech like this really moved me. So without further ado, here she is talking about how the Lebanese and Palestinian resistance is one.
Because we know we're one, our path is one, and our victory is one. We adhere to these three things. Steadfastness, which is our ideology, dignity is our currency, and armed resistance is our duty. And I want people to understand that none of you are helpless in this. We have no right to feel helpless or to despair. You have to realize that people with less than you in Yemen, in Iraq, in Syria, in Lebanon, they've sacrificed all that they have for this battle, their homes, their villages, their families, knowing that it'll be long and it'll be painful, and yet the confidence in victory and in our resistance is growing by the hour. And I've seen it with my own eyes, the crimes of this entity, but also the resilience of my people. There was a recent interview done with a man from South Lebanon who said, the Israelis think that they're the masters of the sky, but we are the masters of the earth. So if a new Middle East is going to be born, it's going to be born on our terms and through our arena. It's either us or us, and there's no other equation that we're willing to accept. So to finish, I guess I want to emphasize that the path before us is difficult, but we're walking it together, and I have no doubt that we will overcome and we will be victorious.
لكل العالم من عندهم انطلقت الحرية ونحن لازم نتعلم منهم. بس احترمي
الأولاد عم يتنفسوا. نحن كلنا قاعدين بألف خير، وأنا بتمنى يعني من كل قلبي إنه يتغير العالم كله من الشيء اللي هلا بده يصير. كل العالم تفهم شو معنى الحرية والديمقراطية والسلام.